In recent years, there has been a heated discussion in the urbanism community. Does beauty matter? Are city aesthetics important? Or is the look of the city and its structures a superficial concern at best and a harmful one at worst that should be sidelined while other conversations take center stage? In the architecture community, other questions are posed. What even is beauty? Isn't it subjective? If so, how can we impose certain aesthetic expectations on buildings? Rather, it should be up to the beholder or creator of the building that makes it the decision if it's beautiful or not. Unfortunately, this philosophizing over the importance of aesthetic value has led to a notable lack of it in our cities. While older cities built in a time when beauty was valued have it in droves, newer cities are often dull, unimpressive, and often downright ugly. In today's episode of The Perfect City, we will discuss what beauty means in the context of urbanism, why it's important, what we've lost by overlooking it, and how we can bring it back. I'm Tayana Panova, Doctor of Psychology focusing on urban planning's impact on health, and my co-host Ariel Viera is a documentarian that examines the intersection between history and urbanism. Let's dive in. Ariel, why have we stopped believing that beauty matters, in your opinion?
That's a great question because I've encountered this living in New York City my entire life. New York City is a city of two worlds. You have the classical inspired architecture, Beaux-Arts architecture, the City Beautiful movement, where in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they wanted to beautify the city by using classical architectural techniques and building these grand buildings like Grand Central Terminal and the Manhattan Municipal Building and many of these buildings. The Woolworth Building is another great example. But now in New York City, we are being surrounded by skinny, super tall residential skyscrapers, many of which have almost zero personality. Beauty is very important to the fabric of a city. Because if you go to a city that's completely modern, that has almost all modernist architecture, it doesn't feel alive.
I agree that beauty is so key to making a city likable. It's such an important component of what we love about cities is the beautiful architecture, the beautiful gardens along the sidewalk, the interesting landmarks and the bridges and the sculptures and the history that we see in the facades. Like all of these things make cities interesting. For example, if you live in the country or in a smaller village where there's less resources, you don't have as much beauty and art and sculptural elements because, naturally that doesn't come about with, a smaller population, and it usually needs a lot of time to come about and lots of resources. So one of the appeals of city life is its beauty, or at least it should be. So when you see a city that lacks beauty and that has intentionally stopped creating beauty, it has, voluntarily taken out one of the biggest parts of its value to residents and visitors, which to me is quite baffling. Why would you choose to do that? I don't understand. And it makes sense when we look at the cities that people choose to travel to and vacation in. They're usually cities that universally we would consider very beautiful, like Paris, for example, or Barcelona or London, or there's many cities that have a lot of aesthetic value. So naturally people visit them and they love them. A large reason because it's because of their aesthetic appeal.
So we gotta define beauty because probably a lot of people already on the top of their head, they're like,
What is
oh, but
beauty?
this one glass skyscraper is beautiful.
Right.
Or this one brutalist city hall building is nice to look at.
There's
But
one in
beauty,
London.
yeah, exactly. There are a few, like the Barbican in London is a
Exactly.
great example of brutalist architecture that looks really
Beautiful.
interesting and
Yeah.
really pleasing.
Yeah.
But that's not always the case. So beauty is indeed in the eye of the beholder, but there is a psychological relationship that one has when looking at
Yes.
something that many people would define as beautiful.
We often say this beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which is true. But I think that people misunderstand this to mean that beauty is completely subjective. And that's not the case. There are certain things that almost universally we consider beautiful, and most people would consider certain things beautiful, whereas other things are more subjective and a matter of preference. And because of this lack of clarity about what beauty is, we've kind of agreed that actually beauty is just a personal preference thing. So we really don't need to concern ourselves with it. You can never please everyone because everyone has such a different perspective on beauty. So better not even think about it. It would be too complicated. And that's not the case. Certain things are generally considered beautiful. And we see that, again, like I mentioned, cities that have millions and millions of visitors per year can more or less be universally considered to be full of beautiful buildings and beautiful parks and streets, etc. And that's because there are certain things that most people like. For example, symmetry or a certain level of detailing people find
Right.
captures their interest. There's something called the fractal quality of an image. And that's the level of detail and complexity and repetition within that image. And people in general, the human species in general, tends to be drawn to the images that have fractal qualities. And that's explained by research by the fact that our evolutionary history was surrounded by nature. We evolved in nature, and much of nature has a fractal quality. Trees, waves, mountains, flowers, clouds are all fractal in nature because fractal means one a pattern repeating at various scales. So when you look at something like a tree with the branches, the waves at different scales repeating themselves, this is something that we have evolved being surrounded by, and so our brains have evolved to react positively to images with those characteristics because there's less friction in processing them cognitively. You know, when you evolve with something, it becomes kind of a part of your nature. So when we see something that subconsciously reminds us of this fractal quality we're drawn to, we like it. It's pleasant for our
Yeah.
eyes. And this fractal quality
Yeah.
is like mid-level detailing.
Like if you can understand the building by looking at it,
Mm-hmm.
I think that lends to that feeling of beauty.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes with these more postmodern buildings, they
Mm-hmm.
tend to be so abstract in
Yeah.
their look, in their aesthetic,
Mm-hmm.
that you have no idea what it is. A very
Yeah.
good example in the US is the Boston City Hall building, which is
Oh,
notoriously known as one of the ugliest buildings in all of the
yeah.
US, probably all of the world. It's brutalist, but the
Yeah.
thing is, it's abstract. So there's places where it's sticking out one way, the other way is sticking out the other way. Things look exposed when they're not
Yeah.
supposed to be exposed. And the building is top heavy, so it kind of extends further out above
Mm-hmm.
than it is on ground level. So even just looking at the building passing by, you don't know what it is, really. It's hard to discern.
Like a chunk of your processing energy is going to trying to figure out what this thing is. Why is this here? What does this mean? What is this supposed to do? Why did they make this decision? You have this kind of a frustration as you look at it because you can't quite understand what you're looking at. And so, this tends to create a negative feeling versus a positive feeling when you see something pretty that just makes your eyes happy, that gives you a sense of comfort and pleasure.
And I think that lends into the other aspect of what is beauty is how does it relate to the structures next to it. So if
Yeah.
it sticks out like a sore thumb, it can look beautiful in certain contexts because it might be novel, but there has to be some sort of relationship between one building with all the buildings surrounding it. If it
Yes.
looks too out of place or too huge compared to the buildings that are very low, or vice versa, it does feel off. And
Yeah.
Boston City Hall is a good example. Another good example is the monument in the middle of Dublin, the gigantic needle, and it
Oh,
sticks out in the middle of one of the old avenues of Dublin, and
or the
the
big tower of
Dubliners make fun
Paris.
of it.
Uh-huh.
Or the Montparnasse Tower of
Exactly.
Paris,
Yeah.
which does not match the architectural aesthetic of anywhere around it.
And it's universally hated by the Parisians because of that.
It is. It is. And I think the other aspect is that good, beautiful architecture stands the
Mhm.
test of time.
Yeah.
So sure, we could use our own personal preferences as a metric, and you should, honor what you find beautiful yourself on a personal level. But at the same time, if we're talking about a city which is built for not just
Yeah.
the individual, but for
Exactly.
the masses,
Exactly.
you have to pay attention to things that have been found beautiful, especially over time.
Yeah.
And in the US, we tend to think that over time means 2 or 3 decades. Same thing in certain parts of Paris. Same thing in certain parts of Mexico City. Cities from all around the world. China probably goes through this, where they think, "Oh yeah, people find brutalism beautiful. All right, let's build everything brutalist."
Yeah.
Um,
Oh
but
goodness.
no, there's certain tenets of architecture that have stuck for so long that's evident that they work. So that's
Yeah.
classical architecture from the ancient Greeks and Romans. That
Mm-hmm.
is certain aspects of medieval architecture that we see in castles, like turrets,
Mm-hmm.
that are beautiful in homes and in apartment buildings. And Asian architecture also has a lot beauty to it, like the pagodas of
Mm-hmm.
East Asia.
Yeah.
So,
The thing that you mentioned about standing the test of time is so interesting and so important. And I just wanted to mention that, those features that even today we consider beautiful and attractive, I think something interesting about them is that again they relate to nature. So there's this concept of biophilia, which is the human love of nature and attraction to things that remind them of nature. And for example, it's been said that the Greek columns, which are so prevalent in classic architecture, remind people of trees. And this
yeah.
kind of, the tall solidity of the tree, which was so important in nature and the natural environment. Then all of the acanthus leaves and the flower and leaf detailing on classic architecture again references nature and the natural beauty. The pagoda curves and other kinds of curvatures that are very visually appealing tend to follow certain geometric principles that we're drawn to, like the golden ratio, and just a lot of features that when you really look closely at what makes them beautiful and why so many people find them beautiful, you discover interesting things about them and how they relate to the natural environment, our evolutionary history, and you begin to see that while some things are subjective, there are a lot of things that are deeper than the subjective aspect of how we perceive beauty. And you asked, why does it matter? What's the importance of beauty? And I
Hmm.
think a very simple answer to that is that people like beauty. Beauty matters because people like it. All people like it. We are drawn to beautiful, everybody's drawn to beautiful things. That's
Yeah.
why we create beautiful things. That's why often beautiful things are expensive because people are willing to pay money for beautiful things like jewelry, like paintings, like fashion, because we like beautiful things. And that's so essential to this argument because when you give people or you offer people something that they like, they are very likely to choose it when they have a choice. They're very
Mm.
likely to give money to be surrounded by it or to possess it, which is important if you want to drive people towards certain economic behaviors or decisions. So basically, beauty is a motivator for behaviors and actions because we like it the same way we like delicious foods, the same way we like good music. It's a sensory pleasure. And so when you incorporate beauty into something like a city or a street, you attract people to it. You attract foot traffic to a street that's beautiful. You attract visitation to a park or a landmark that's beautiful. You capture the monetary value of people going to those places, the tourism of people going to those places or entering shops on that
Hmm.
beautiful street or around that beautiful landmark. So, the fact that people are drawn to beauty is one of the most important things about it because it can and should be infused in places and things that we want people to engage with.
There's this certain sense that uh, it's not worth the cost
Hmm.
nowadays.
Which is not true. It's not true at
Yeah,
all.
why build in materials that tend to be a little bit more expensive, like stone?
Mm.
And why even try to put any ornamentation at all to
Yeah.
a building?
Hmm.
Because it just costs too much, and we don't have that many artisans in many of these cities.
And it doesn't mean, there's no value in it.
Yeah,
That's what the argument is. Why
ex-
why put beauty
exactly.
when what's the point? It doesn't matter really. It's just a superficial thing.
But it is intriguing that the one can make a very strong business uh, argument that
Absolutely.
it
Yeah,
is worth the cost, especially in the
absolutely.
long term. Maybe not in 6 months, maybe not in
Yeah.
5 years, but definitely in 10, 20, 30 years, sometimes
Yeah, it's an
100, 200
investment.
years.
It's an investment.
We think that everything has to be efficient in terms of pricing and also
Hmm.
in its functionality. Why does a
Yeah.
mall have to even look beautiful? It's just a bunch of shops that people have to walk through, and we want to optimize people shopping. So who
Hmm.
cares about all the ornamentation? Um, but it proves that those when it's like functional architecture, it lasts for such a short while. It's not long lasting.
Hmm.
So that's why a lot of malls in America are being abandoned, because the architecture is not even worth saving,
Yeah.
because it's not even that aesthetically interesting. I'm generalizing, of course. It's not with every single mall. Um, but
No,
when you
it's
compare it to the Milan Gallery, uh,
just
or
gorgeous
the
place.
arcades of London, they're
Yeah.
gorgeous.
Stunning, stunning places. And they're shopping areas,
Yeah.
but they're so beautiful that even if the shops were taken away, people would still go there. That's how beautiful they are. That they are in
Yes.
themselves beautiful, not just in service to the shopping, but just by their own virtue, they are beautiful and they are destinations because of that. And that's such a good
Yeah.
point that you bring up is that when there's no beauty, when it's just functionality, people don't care really what happens to it. It
Yeah.
does its job. You go there, you shop, you buy some clothes, then they tear it down and you don't think twice about it. You go to another shop
Hmm.
because beauty puts an extra layer of value to a place that creates attachment to it. When something
Right.
is beautiful, you grow fond of it. You like it, it brings you joy, so you grow attached to it and you want to go and visit it because it gives pleasure to you, not just functionality. Like you said, the arcades in London, like those places are so beautiful that even if you never think about buying something from there because they're luxury shops usually, you would still go just to experience being there in this beautiful place. And if it were to be torn down, people would protest because
Hmm.
it's a place that people love to visit due to its beauty and aesthetic value. So beauty creates attachment and makes us love a place. It makes us care about a place when it's beautiful because beauty gives us joy and pleasure. It gives something back.
Yeah. 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 Beauty gives that kind of societal feeling of, I want to take care of this place,
Yeah.
uh,
Mhm.
which which doesn't happen when a place is in disarray, or it's ugly. Like,
Or
you
ugly or
really don't
basic.
care about it.
You don't care.
um,
It's just
and
functional. You don't care.
exactly, yeah, 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 and that's why building long-lasting architecture that is also
Hmm.
beautiful does make a massive difference in cities. I think
Hmm.
it's no coincidence that some of the most visited cities in the world, as you mentioned, are the ones with beautiful architecture that lasts.
Yeah. Something
And
worth
it,
seeing.
yeah, it's something worth seeing. This was something worth going back to over and over again. Something worth
Yeah.
spending money to take care of and keep it clean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think another aspect is also, beauty does actually increase the business, because if you think about it, in these arcades of London, the galleries of Milan, what's another good example? Champs Elysees in Paris,
Hmm.
Times Square, which I would argue has some architectural beauty as well. They all have shops that have stayed there for a long time. In
Hmm.
some of these European cities, it's been nearly a century, or more. So it does lend to good business in the long term also.
Because it attracts foot traffic. So like if you think of those strip malls in so much of the United States, where it's a huge parking lot and then just these concrete boxes with any kind of shop inside, they're copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, very
Right.
basic, minimal, functional, simple design, nothing memorable at all, and so you don't see people walking around those areas and hanging out. You see people getting out of their cars, going into their store that they plan to go to, and then coming out, going back in their car and leaving. So there's no foot traffic. People aren't walking around and discovering other stores in the area because they're walking around. They're just going to their store and then going back home via car. Whereas in these places that are beautiful, it's a pleasure to just walk around them. And then as you're
Hmm.
walking around, you see a shop that you didn't intend to visit, you didn't intend to buy anything from there, but because you're walking by it, you see it, and it has a nice window display that captures your attention. So you decide to walk in, and lo and behold, something catches your eye that you like, and you buy it. So you become a shopper, you become a patron of this store without even intending to, because the beauty of the place, the attractiveness of the area led you to walk around, created the foot traffic that drew you in to those places of business. And you ended up buying something. So it's very good for business to create beautiful shopping areas.
Why do you think cities have ignored beauty?
I think that
Mhm.
after World War II is when we really saw this rise of to put it simply, ugly places. Places without aesthetic value, places that were just functional, modernist buildings, brutalist buildings. And I think
Yes.
it's because around that time, those wars, people associated beauty with the old way, the
Yeah.
old regimes, the bad people, the people in power who were bad at those times. They had a lot of beauty and they valued beauty and they surrounded themselves with beauty, and so people associated beauty with bad times and bad people
Hmm.
and things that they wanted to leave behind. But that is a classic case of throwing out the baby with the dirty bathwater.
Hmm.
Because there was beauty in a time of badness, people decided beauty was bad. But that's not the case. Beauty existed in that time because people like beauty, as I said earlier, and whenever they have the resources, they create beautiful things or they buy beautiful things. It's not inherently bad, but that's the association that happened, I think, historically.
I had this realization when I was going to the other cities in England aside from London. So I went to
Mhm.
Manchester, Liverpool, these cities that were attacked during World War II quite significantly. Realized that in essence, after World War II, we had this kind of societal trauma, uh,
Yeah.
realizing that cities are a very vulnerable to war, to air raids, and to nuclear weapons. And in essence, I think that's why people started moving away from the cities. There was a kind of a moment of disillusionment, realizing the architecture does not last because other humans can destroy it
Hmm.
with their napalm bombs and atom bombs. It is worth building these structures and taking care of them. It's worth that small little risk that something might happen to them. But I think that's why on a societal psychological level
Hmm.
people stop building beautiful in especially in Europe and North America.
Like you said, I think that there was a quote somebody said, how wonderful it is to have loved something so much to
Yeah.
be so sad when it's gone. So
Hmm.
the sadness, the tragedy of losing something that you feel is because you loved it, because you loved
Right.
that thing. So it's just an indicator that that thing was special. And even though it's destroyed, it doesn't mean that it wasn't really special in the time that it existed. So, like you said, not creating beautiful things because there's a risk of losing them also isn't the way forward, because then you don't create places and things that people love, that positively impact our mental health and our well-being.
And this has happened before in the course of history. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe descended into the Dark Ages, where a lot of classical architecture started disappearing. people started quarrying old buildings, like the temples of Sicily or the parts of the Parthenon, in order to build their houses
Yeah.
and maybe stables and things like that.
Yeah.
So they started taking apart what used to be very beautiful architecture a few hundred years before to make something more practical. This is a very important lesson in history because people don't realize that if we don't maintain practice in building good architecture, classical architecture, ornamentation, woodworking, stone construction, we can lose
Mm-hmm.
those skills on the societal level. For centuries in Europe, they forgot how to build like the ancient Greeks. They
Mm-hmm.
forgot how to build a building that looks symmetrical in terrain that wasn't symmetrical. They forgot how to do that. They forgot to build huge unreinforced domes out of concrete, which was the case with the Pantheon in Rome. For centuries we couldn't build something like it until the Renaissance, where a lot of these classical teachings of architecture started really being rediscovered and more
Mm-hmm.
money was put into artisans and stonemasons in order to figure this out again. And this happened
Yeah.
even prior with the descent of ancient Egypt and a period where we forgot how to build pyramids as big as the Egyptians and other temple structures and obelisks. So this
Yeah.
is a recurring cycle. This is the danger I think we are putting ourselves in right now, that we are starting to forget classical architecture because we put no
Yeah.
money into it. We put very little money into it, and we put less and less education into it. There's
Yeah.
schools nowadays, architectural schools, that no longer teach classical architecture.
Just crazy.
Yeah, they only
And why?
they they only encourage experimentation and abstraction and modernism because that's seen as the way to make money in modern day society in that field.
This emphasis that architecture schools and architects put on expression of the self, or their self-expression as
Yeah.
architects, creating something unique, something that captures their vision, something that is, different, something that stands out, something that will win them awards or get them featured in architecture magazines. That is a self-serving pursuit, to
Yes.
create something that reflects you and that's unique and that makes you stand out. That is self-serving. At the end of the day, a building is a part of a community.
Hmm.
A building is a component in a society that is meant to live for years and years and years and
Right.
be a part of that community for years and years and years. It is not a monument to your skill and your interest and your artistic preferences as the architect. That is something that you could say about a sculpture, a painting in a museum. Like, fine, if you want to be an artist that creates something to express yourself and to show something innovative and new, there are many different kinds of art for that, and that's wonderful.
Yes.
But architecture, the creation of buildings that are parts of communities and must be integrated into the lives of thousands and millions of people, need to be designed and built in a way that those people resonate with and like. If they're only built in a way that the architect resonates with and likes, that is a self-serving, ego-driven pursuit that I don't think should be the standard and the accepted way of creating buildings. I personally find that to be a major issue nowadays with new buildings and new architecture, is this emphasis on self-expression.
Yeah, I mean, there's always been like a ego drive with architecture.
And
Not
art
all
in general.
architecture, but some of more or more famous buildings definitely were built in order to impress, like the
Oh, to
Pantheon of
stand
Rome.
out.
Yeah, which
And
was
that's,
like the pet project of Hadrian.
yeah, like sometimes it's
Yeah,
wonderful. Like there, it's not black and white. And I
right.
think that often when we say these things, people say, "Oh, so you hate creative buildings that are unique and stand out." No. For example, the Gaudi buildings in Barcelona are
Yes.
famously very different from anything else in the city, and almost everybody loves them
Hmm.
because They are different, but they are beautiful because they integrate these features that we talked about that people consider beautiful: detailing, curvature, colors. You know, they're made with the intention not just to stand out and be unique and be different and be self-expression, but to also be beautiful and to create something that the people of the city will like and feel proud of and be drawn to. And that is really the important thing. You can create something unique and different, something that
Mhm.
stands out, but also think about whether the people will like it, whether it will contribute positively to the city, whether it will be integrated well with its surroundings. Those are also very important considerations.
I think the big issue is it's architects wanting to self serve their vision of building something that would win them awards to impress other architects.
Yeah.
It's not to impress the people.
And it
uh
should be for the people.
yeah. Because as I mentioned, it's sometimes nice to have these super grand buildings or projects of
Hmm.
one, ruler or one a president or a company. But if
Hmm.
it's impressing the people, at least it's a win-win
It serves them. Yeah,
situation.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. But if
Yeah,
people
yeah.
hate it, then what is actually the point?
Architecture has become similar to the art world. It's just to impress other people within their field. And that just doesn't really serve anyone. It's such a waste of money, I think, in my opinion, to build these oblong buildings with massive cantilevers that make people feel uneasy even standing right
Yeah,
next to it, just because it looks good on a rendering.
that's another
So
thing.
silly.
That's another great point, making people feel uneasy. So there are
Yeah.
certain features, visual features, when we talk about the importance of beauty and aesthetic value, why does it matter? There are certain features that make people uneasy. So things like straight edges, sharp points, in
Yes.
general make people feel uneasy because they remind of weapons or teeth or threats.
Mhm.
And so, on a psychological, subconscious level, it gives a sense of unease because it is a feature that we associate with something bad for us. Whereas curved lines, for example, people tend to be really drawn to curved lines because curved lines are organic forms. In nature, in human bodies, there's almost no straight lines, it's all curved. And so buildings like Gaudi's in Barcelona, he's famous for not wanting to incorporate any straight lines. He wants a
Yeah.
very organic feel. And that's a big reason why those buildings are considered so beautiful and interesting. So those features, like there's this one building I don't remember, maybe it's one that you mentioned, where it's like these sharp like blades coming out of the building and it's meant to
Oh,
look like a porcupine or something or like a knife. Every time you look at it, that's unease and discomfort and stress, and it's the visual components that reference weapons or threats that make us feel that way. And when you think about it, a lot of our skyscrapers are a bunch of straight lines. And so it's natural that we
yes.
look at them and points, and the edges are like the corners are points. So we're surrounding ourselves with things that on a subconscious level make us uneasy, which is very strange of us.
That's why New York was very smart in the early 1900s to impose regulations on how skyscrapers are built. So they are
Mm-hmm.
not just straight lines jutting
Mm-hmm.
out, but they are built tiered, like a wedding cake
Mm-hmm.
style. Because one of the uneasy parts of architecture in modern day New York is the Billionaires Row residential skyscrapers. And some
Yeah.
of these are naturally long width to height ratio. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
1 to 18.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's an upper limit to what a human would feel comfortable with, like an obelisk, or
Mm-hmm.
even standing right by the Washington Monument, which is a really large obelisk. I feel uneasy standing right next to it. So there is an upper limit to how tall can something be to its width. And in New York, when you stand by these buildings, they feel really uncomfortable. And they have to
Yeah.
do a lot of engineering maneuvering in order to make the buildings even comfortable to be inside. Because if you
Mm-hmm.
don't put proper amount of dampeners or these tanks in order
Mm-hmm.
to reduce the sway of the building, or pressurize the windows in order to make sure that the pressure inside is not uncomfortable as it is outside, people would get nauseous and start throwing up inside these buildings. It's that bad with some of these skyscrapers. On their own, they cannot be safe places to live or to work.
Yeah. They're being created to be like these engineering marvels. There's a lot of buildings where you look at them and you immediately realize that someone made this just to show it could be done, just to prove that this strange new idea can be made into a building. Sometimes treated as an architectural machine or an engineering marvel. Like, hey, look, it works. If you have a small base and a second half, it still stands. It's not going to fall over. Isn't that cool? Yeah, I suppose it's cool, but it's not pleasant to look at, and I don't like the fact that it's so prominent in the skyline. But sure, yeah, architecturally and engineering wise, that's an
Right.
interesting concept. So I think that there's too much emphasis on this and not on making it a beautiful thing that people enjoy looking at.
Let's talk a little bit about policy, governmental policy, because when having a conversation like this, people start jumping the gun thinking, oh, are you going to mandate everyone to live in the same type of
Yeah.
beautiful, ornate building, proposing that we become in a totalitarian regime where we just say all buildings must be gigantic and beautiful? Which I think is also like, no.
It's not black or white, guys. I think that's so important that in these conversations, it always goes to, oh, so it must be black if it's not white? Or, oh, it must be white if it's not black? No, there's a spectrum of gray, and we're usually talking about a part of the gray.
So how do you think we could actually incentivize governments, especially cities, to build more beautiful?
Paris, Barcelona, Amsterdam, the overall look of the city is harmonious because there are certain features that exist on all the buildings. Like you mentioned before, like the city says there's a certain height that the buildings cannot pass, for example, or there's a certain material that we want the roofs to be to create a harmonious look. Having a criteria for certain details or certain features to create a visual harmony, I think has historically proven to create quite beautiful cities, because harmony is something that we are drawn to. It gives us, like we talked about, comfort and visual pleasure. We like to see things that are harmonious together, that aren't just every single building is completely different than the one next to it. It creates visual discordance and cacophony, and it can become stressful to see so much chaos in one place. Whereas when you have a certain standard for, a few features that makes it look cohesive, people are drawn to that.
In any major city, there's regulations on buildings. It's never a true free-for-all. You cannot build a building where the first floor is 80 feet in width, and then the second floor is 120 feet in width. You can't do that because that is structurally unstable. And of course, we want for people to be safe. You can't build a building without any fire escapes or fireproof staircasing, because in the event of a fire, you need people to get out. So I think to mandate certain architectural styles or elements across a neighborhood is not really too out of the ordinary, I think, because safety is important, structural integrity is important, but beauty is, as we're talking about right now, is important. It might not be the thing that's meant to save a life in the event of a fire or a flood, but in the long term, it is very important to also have beauty. It does make financial sense for any city to encourage a set architectural style or set architectural elements or set height limitations.
People are really concerned this means what do you mean all the buildings have to look the same?
Yeah.
No. So I think that it's important to have a balance, like having certain rules or certain criteria to create that visual cohesion and harmony. For example, a certain height or material, like the Parisian roofs. But then give freedom in other aspects. Maybe the facade, there could be freedom in how you create the facade, or the balconies, or, there should be a balance of freedom of design so people can express their creativity and the uniqueness, of the architectural vision, but also certain features that should be kept stable so that they create the harmony and that all the buildings kind of work together in the same style, more or less. This is common practice. This isn't a new concept. Like, not only European cities, but Curacao, every building is a color, like a bright color, like pink or teal or yellow. It's common throughout the whole town of Curacao to have this look, and that's what makes it characteristic. That's what makes it memorable. That's what makes it beautiful, and it draws people in because it's a unique thing. Or the roofs of Paris
Right.
that make Paris are stand out in people's memory when they think about the look of the city, or the interesting triangular tiered roofs in Amsterdam, or there's these things create the character of a city. It's like when you have colors, when you have yellow, blue, purple, pink, all those colors separately, they're all interesting, but when you mesh them all together, you get brown. So if it's a
Right.
similar concept, if every building is allowed to be completely different and unique, then when you look at the bigger picture, you see brown. It doesn't look nice when you think about the city as a whole, because a building does not stand alone. It is part of a whole. It is part of the urban fabric. It is part of the skyline. So it needs to integrate with its surrounding buildings. It can't just stand alone, but it should also have uniqueness and creativity so that you don't get bored. Like, a lot of the suburbs are just all cookie cutter, and that's the
Yes.
another extreme. You don't want either extreme.
You don't want
Gray area.
either extreme. Exactly, exactly. Yes, yes, precisely. And not all mandates should be the same everywhere.
Yeah.
It's a case by case basis. I personally think that there should be autonomy in some level. So in neighborhood
Hmm.
level, or in the case of New York, we have boroughs. London has
Yeah.
boroughs, or arrondissement level.
Hmm.
There should be a case by case basis. Because yes, sometimes the mandate should be color, and it makes sense, as you mentioned, with the
Hmm.
pink houses or with the red tiled roofs of Turin and Prague, or the mansard roofs of Paris. Because one thing that people are bothered by in a city like Toronto in Canada is that you have these very suburban like neighborhoods
Hmm.
that are generally 1 to 2 or maybe 3 stories tall, and then at the corner, you have a 30-story high rise. Many people in that city, it's a bit disorienting. It's like, oh my God, it's jutting out of nowhere. In New York, it made a lot of sense to make those mandates of the building's shape with the
Hmm.
skyscrapers, because obviously you did
Yeah.
not want to make huge canyons of shadow in the middle of New York City. But that might
Yeah.
not make sense for Paris, because Paris is not building that tall in the middle of the
You have to
city.
consider the context, the culture.
Yeah.
It's very unique. It's not something that can be imposed externally. It has to be something that reflects the city, the community. It's like you said, case by case. It has to be ingrained with the context. But it's something that
Yeah.
also I think I just wanted to point out that you said that I think is a very important part of the beauty conversation is when we talk about things like preserving the character of a neighborhood, and then you
Mhm.
have the other side of that, which is housing needs to be built. So I think there's a lot of friction on the topic of beauty when you have the people who want to preserve the beauty of their neighborhood, and then the people who say, sure, that's lovely, but housing needs to be built. And so
Yes.
sometimes that big building that you consider an eyesore is housing for a lot of people that don't have housing. So, that's been a big conversation in the urbanism world, and the YIMBY versus the NIMBY debate, basically, which is
Let's.
the not in my
Yeah.
backyard people who want to, in theory, build more housing, but they don't want it to be in their backyard and ruin the visual appeal and character of their neighborhood. And then the yes in my backyard people who say housing must be built at all costs.
Usually, when talking about this topic, I bet some people are listening and think and only have pictured in their minds commercial districts, train stations, governmental buildings, civic centers, but they weren't thinking too much about houses. And the thing
Mm-hmm.
is, uh, I think our entire conversation also applies to neighborhoods that are mostly residential. or blocks are mostly residential. Because if you have something that juts out of nowhere just because we're desperate for housing, yes, it satisfies the need of housing. It still looks ugly, and people are going to resent it more than embrace it in their neighborhoods. That's why I think Toronto is a good example of it gone awry with being a little bit too liberal in letting people build tall anywhere. And then this happens in cities like LA as well, where you have a random gigantic condo next to a block filled with one story single family homes. But you have the other extreme that is the cookie cutter suburb that's all the same and is so spaced out and sprawling that it is just visually disturbing to see that much sameness. What we're missing is the gray area. Good housing that was called the missing middle housing, which is basically where a lot of places in the world do really well. We have the brownstones of Brooklyn that are row houses. In Philadelphia, it's row houses. In Boston, it's row houses. In Paris, we have the 7-story Haussmann buildings that are residential and commercial. In Milan, there's this similar type of architecture, 7 stories across the entire city. Same thing with Barcelona. In London, you have the row houses or the duplexes. These type of houses is actually what we have prevented in many parts of North America and parts of Europe that are not the historical centers. We have prevented from that row houses being built because row houses don't conform to our modern ideals of living, which is, oh, I want to live in my own space, or we need a lot of apartments in one space. If you're doing the either extreme, you're going to have a city filled with a bunch of condos, which is the case in Jersey City, which in my opinion could be a very beautiful city in its own right, which is across the river from New York. But if you walk around it, it's just a bunch of high-rise condos because they all want the view of the city and they don't build anything in the middle. So the city's very unpleasant to walk through. So we need more of that middle housing everywhere. There should be some mandates to make it beautiful. Why can't we build Haussmann style buildings in places like Brooklyn, New York, or in the outer suburbs of Barcelona, which are needing more housing? Why can't we build that style of architecture again? Why can't we build row housing in more of the suburbs of the U.S. or the suburbs of England, which when they need it?
Brownstones are so famous and beloved because those are lovely buildings. People have the wrong impression of what row houses mean. I think the problem is that when we talk about building new housing, people are either talking about creating towers of housing or they're not talking about that, but the people hearing them think they're talking about that. And they envision an ugly tower in the middle of their charming, beautiful, picturesque neighborhood that they love. I think it really hurts the conversation about housing to shut down either of those people, which tends to happen in YIMBY-NIMBY debates. Usually you see one side telling the other side that they're wrong and idiots and selfish for wanting what they want. At the end of the day, we're all people who want to live in places that we feel comfortable and love. It's not black or white. I really think that that's going to be a theme throughout all of these conversations, is that we've made it black and white when it's not black and white. And adding housing shouldn't be adding an ugly block tower to a picturesque neighborhood. Throughout the world, you have beautiful missing middle housing, like you called it, which is housing that's between 2 and 7 floors high. In some of the most beautiful cities in the world, that's the predominant type of architectural style for residential areas. And people love it. It's very aesthetically pleasing. So it doesn't have to be an ugly tower building. And it doesn't mean that you sacrifice density because, like we've talked about, a lot of the cities that have that kind of missing middle type housing has the highest density, because when you distribute that housing evenly throughout a neighborhood, you're able to fit a lot more people in than perhaps you might be able to in one tall tower that stands out and sticks out like a sore thumb. I recommend the book Soft City by David Sim, I think, is a wonderful book about this kind of housing that's usually around a courtyard and is very common in cities throughout the world that have a high density and are beautiful at the same time. So that balance is possible, and we have to stop pretending like it isn't, and telling people that they must sacrifice something they care about in order to be good people. That's not going to move the conversation forward. We have to be able to have, compromise and conversations and nuance and dialogue, and really focus on that gray area.
Yeah, because
as well.
ultimately people are not going to build for free, or nor they're not going to go into massive amounts of debt to build a building that looks nice. There has to be some money to be made, and there has to be a sense of ownership with the people who live there as well. Also, I think throughout this entire conversation, people might have had in their minds, oh, they're just talking about Western classical architecture. That's what is deemed as beautiful. But that's not the case. It's not just Western classical architecture that is beautiful. It tends to be the easier example to use, I think, for sure, if you grew up anywhere in North America or Europe, and other parts of the world have used Western classical architecture to make beautiful buildings. But no, this applies to a lot of different styles of architecture. What other examples have you seen on your trips?
There are gorgeous buildings in Mexico City. And then there's there was this famous architect, I don't remember the name, that went viral recently about creating beautiful indigenous inspired buildings with very vibrant colors in South America that were absolutely gorgeous.
Right.
You might have seen that. I
I
don't
haven't
know
seen
the
it,
name.
but the Adobe style housing is very beautiful also.
That as
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
in Asia. Oh my goodness. Like if you like, and a lot of this conversation might have made people think that we hate glass towers and, skyscrapers and things like that. No, that's not the case. For example, a
No.
lot of Chinese
Philip
cities
Johnson.
have
Yeah,
incredible skyscrapers that are
right.
just so beautiful, and a lot of value has been put on the aesthetics of them,
Mhm.
making them interesting and appealing, incorporating neon murals and different kind of signage. The pagodas, the neon pagodas in Chongqing are just an exceptional
Can't wait to go.
combination of modern innovation and classic architecture. There's just so many ways to create beautiful buildings that aren't limited to, classical European architecture at all, but that still incorporate those concepts we talked about that are university loved, like detailing and
Right.
fractal qualities and symmetry. And there's just components that are beautiful in a more objective sense than we usually talk about. And when they're integrated into the architectural design, you have unlimited possibilities for creating something appealing, and it makes everything more interesting and fun and attractive.
Yeah, yeah. I think in Europe, it's not just classical, which means ancient times, ancient Roman, ancient Greek generally, but also medieval. The medieval cities of Europe are stunning, in my opinion. If you go to a city like Maastricht in Netherlands, or in the UK, would be like York, England, medieval architecture is very beautiful as well. It can be very nice to look at. And then also you have the Dutch style of housing, which is a combination of wood and brick. And that is also very gorgeous in cities like New Amsterdam. One is not limited to just one style of stone architecture, usually limestone and marble with beautiful ornate statues. It's not the only. And there's also beautiful wood style of architecture that's found in Scandinavia and parts of America. Even what the style of architecture that's seen as ugly, like brutalism, has good examples, like the Barbican, in my opinion, in London. It's not for everyone. A lot of people do find it beautiful, and people do live there.
It can be done.
It can be done, yeah. And there's definitely great examples of especially Bauhaus architecture that is seen in many parts of the U.S. So it can be done. Even Le Corbusier made a few beautiful buildings, a few. But yes, there's a lot of opportunity here to make gorgeous architecture. So stay tuned. Next episode, we're going to talk about something that potentially could destroy the beauty of cities: cars. Dr. Panova, where can people find your work?
You can find me at Dr. T. Panova on all platforms: YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky.
Remember, I have no idea what Blue Sky is. You can find me at Urbanist Ariel across all video platforms. Ariel Viera on LinkedIn. Let us know, what was the most beautiful city you've been to? Stay curious, my friends.